It's yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor Whalen. Here we are, the end of our third quarter. Some good news that we'll be sharing that we're seeing some very positive trends in some of our crime rates. A few things, other things I'm going to go over as well. And one of those is just our general calls for service is the first slide we're looking at. It seemed recently that anecdotally, as I listened to the radio, that our officers were constantly busy, and it seemed more than normal with dispatch calls for service. But rather than just assume that that was the case, I actually had our crime analysts pull the dispatched calls for service, and this is the trend line that we saw. So it wasn't my imagination that we have seen a bit of an increase or a steady increase for the last couple of years in our dispatched calls for service. You could see our third quarter, each one of those spikes is, I believe, a third quarter. And I think it's a little, it's on the positive side that this last third quarter was not as much of a spike as we've seen previously, but still the trend is on the way up. And there's probably a few things related to that. One of those is the increase in our population. When we go up by 3,000 to 4,000 people, you're going to have a certain increase in 911 calls, and it's a math problem. So, but some of the other, the number of arrests and the crimes that are reported aren't matching this increase. So I also think that some of what we're seeing are non-crime related calls for service. Again, the welfare checks, things like that really dominate our officers' time. Our big spreadsheet of numbers, this has a lot of positives on it. As you look at the year-to-date change from 21 to 22, it's not as positive. But what you'll see later is what we're still working off or trying to get away from was an exceptionally high first and second quarter in a couple of different areas in our property crimes. And that's why you're seeing a close to 20% increase from 21 to 22 year to date. But a lot of negatives in the second quarter to third quarter numbers, which is good to see. And there's a couple of categories in particular that I'll talk about in a little bit that are we've been hoping or trying to work on driving down. We're starting to see some success finally. So person crimes, obviously, I've talked and said repeatedly over the years that property crimes drives our total crime rate. But person crimes, that's where people are getting hurt. Whether it's assaults or shootings or any number of things like that. Those are where people are getting hurt, and those are, while the volume of calls of persons crimes aren't the same as property crimes, that's what we want to see as low as possible. And we did see a pretty good decrease from, a little bit of a decrease from the second quarter to third quarter, but a significant decrease if we look at third quarter last year. We had a big spike then, and we saw a significant drop off since then, and still seeing as you look at the trends going back to 2019 on the low side. This is the one that really looks good. So the property crimes by quarter, and we've seen from a high in the end of 2004 or the end of 2001 last year, and a very high first and second quarter. Have a significant drop back down to levels that are, some of the lowest that we've seen in a while for this quarter. And you'll notice that's the property crime chart, the motor vehicle theft chart. This is one of the crimes that we've been working to drive down that saw a huge spike during the pandemic and the subsequent jail shutdowns and legislative changes and all kinds of things that contributed to this. But we are making good progress here, especially in this last quarter, seeing it being, going from, again, in the first quarter of this year was just astronomical, and dropping down to, almost half of what it was in the first quarter. And a lot of that I do give credit to. I mean, there's always going to be some different environmental factors at play, but the Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force, it's headed up by our Sergeant Carroll, and we also have a detective on it, has done a lot of great work in focusing on the repeat offenders and working with prosecutors and jails to get them, one, off the streets, and then two, prosecuted. And then the total crime by quarter. And, again, I'll be their broken record and say that it's always driven by property crimes. And as our property crimes have gone down, so has our total crime. And a different way to look at it is total crime by third quarter year to date. And this, when you look at it from this perspective, there is an increase. However, if we're talking year to date, this includes the exceptionally high first and second quarters. So that's why we're seeing the exceptionally high year-to-date number. If we are able to continue on this trend through the fourth quarter, we will, I'm confident, see it back down to, more normalized levels. And then crimes against persons, even though, we saw that big spike or increase in year-to-date third quarter total crime, crimes against persons are still low. I mean, if you look, that's the lowest that we've seen year to date in, 6 years. But, unfortunately, property crimes, again, year to date, and this is driven by that exceptionally high first and second quarter of this year. And this is one that I always do like to keep track of, and I do. I think this is something that affects all of us, and that's collisions, and it affects us either through insurance rates, through the people that are driving around us that we have to worry about, or to just simply traffic congestion that backs up behind a collision. Driving these numbers down I think is beneficial to the entire city. And I think some of this can be attributed to just the road improvements that the city's made over the past few years. And, there's weather plays a significant factor in this. And for as much as, whatever the arguments are out there about, the impacts of climate change, having a dry October leads to fewer collisions. And then in the name of looking at what's keeping our officers busy, we're still seeing a lot of calls related just to gunshots, whether it's somebody hit or not. We still see an increase in people just shooting guns or using guns to resolve disputes. And this isn't necessarily people hit, but it's still something that's troubling and still something that's on the rise. And we're hoping that we're able to drive this down, or at least find a cause for it that we can focus our efforts on. And this isn't just Lakewood. This is something that we see region-wide, if not nationwide. Now, this has been a popular chart of mine. I've been asked for this by a couple different entities. Once I first presented it to you folks, I think in the last quarter, and we've kept it up. And this is comparing the eludes where people, flee from traffic stops to actual pursuits where we actually chase them. You can see where the law changed in 2001, and it's the law, the changes in law has had a marginal effect on the number of pursuits that we actually get into. However, we've seen a huge increase in the number of cases where people are just taking off from traffic stops for one reason or another. Sometimes we know they're in a stolen car. Sometimes we have no idea why they're taking off. But I think this is pretty clear evidence that the legislation that passed regarding pursuits had actually had the reverse effect if they were going for improving public safety. Because one of the things we know is that just because we stop chasing them or we don't chase them doesn't mean they all of a sudden drive safely. They continue driving recklessly for well after we stop, we turn our lights off and go the other way. So
What are the
these are,
differences between the two trend lines there? I don't see a legend on that slide for some reason.
oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I missed that. I'm sorry. So the black line is pursuit, where we actually chase somebody.
Mhm.
The red line is eluding, where somebody flees from us and we don't chase them.
Got it. So the black line represents those that are authorized under
Correct.
statute.
Correct.
Sexual assault.
Well, we either have probable cause for that specific list of,
Mhm.
of crimes, they're serious crimes,
Okay.
or reasonable suspicion for DUI.
Got it. Okay.
And typically what we're seeing is those are mostly DUI related pursuits. And this will come up again, I'm sure, during this next legislative session. There's already some work being done to draft bills in advance of the session, but we'll see what kind of progress we can make. Now, some of the highlights, as we look at the quarter in general, the 17% reduction in motor vehicle thefts and 14% reduction in theft, which I will call shoplifting, because that was really what was driving up some of our theft and larceny numbers. That's from the second quarter to the third quarter. So exceptionally positive trends there. And then the almost 2.5% reduction in all persons crimes from the second quarter. Again, those are instances, they're all manner of assaults where people are, getting hurt. We saw a reduction in those. And then if we look at year to date from 2021, an 11% reduction in persons crimes. That is significant. And that's worth highlighting for our quarter. Outside of just crime and patrol response, we also this quarter worked on our reaccreditation through WASPIC. And we achieved it and actually did really well through the process. This was significant for a couple of reasons, not the least of which we had somebody that was new to our accreditation manager position. Officer Mike Wiley was assigned to that position in January, I believe, and was thrown accreditation. And if any of you have ever dealt with accreditation, unless you're immersed in it, it is hard to wrap your mind around everything that's required. But he jumped in with both feet and was able to work through all the policy changes, all the documentation that we needed, and got us through with flying colors. And we're now reaccredited through WASPIC for the next 4 years. Thank you. And then we've also done even more hiring, or we continue to hire. 3 of our new hires from this quarter: Joe Walker, who's a former firefighter, Kayla Dratt, who was from Nisqually. She came to us as a corrections officer. And then Pat Lavers was a lateral from Kirkland PD. So it's a good mix of lateral and entry level. Joe and Kayla are both up at the academy. They're scheduled to graduate in February. And all of our other folks that you've seen over the last few months, that our big hire group, are starting to get off of field training. In December, we're looking at most of them being off of training by then. So getting them back out on the road. So just a lot of really good work. And I do, with the change in leadership in the department that's coming up, I do feel good about leaving the cupboards full for whoever takes over, whether it's with staffing or with the accreditation or with the biennial budget being done. There's a lot of stuff that whoever that is not going to have to focus on, and they can just implement whatever vision they have for the department. So one of the things too that I'll highlight that wasn't necessarily from the third quarter, but just came up Friday, was some funding that we're receiving, that we're on the cusp of receiving from Beacon Health to help pay for our second MHP that will be coming on board here, I think in December. They actually reached out to me some months ago. Beacon Health did, and said that they have some grant money that they're looking to give out specifically for MHPs for co-responder programs. So once we had our MHP identified, they actually reached out to me and reminded me, hey, don't forget that this is here. So we're going to be receiving about, once this goes through, and I think it might be actually be on one of your agendas coming up, But once it goes through, we'll get about $50,000 for the first 6 months of the year to help pay for that position. So it's significant. And again, it was them reaching out to us to help fund it. So I think some of that comes from the reputation that the city has for having such a well-established co-responder team. That's one of the oldest, if not the oldest, in Pierce County, and a lot of good connections with Multicare and Beacon and Greater Lakes. So with that, I'd be happy to turn it over to anybody for any questions.
Thank you, Mayor Whalen. I just want to go back to that rather than talk about the stats. When the new MHP comes on, how are you going to, you'll have an officer assigned to each, now we'll have two, you'll have an officer assigned. How are you going to do the hours is, I guess, the quickest way to ask the question.
Yeah, so the schedule where they would be the most effective is we'll probably look at it again, but it's probably going to be day shift still. And we didn't pick that by randomly when we first started the program. We actually looked at when the times of day and the days of the week where we were getting our most calls that would require, some sort of mental health intervention. And it was still day shift. It was still, it's not the middle of the night. It's, late in the day often, but a lot of times it's first thing in the morning and then later in the day.
So will you have two of them on at the same time, or will it be 7 days a week? Will you start doing 410s or something?
We are still going to explore some of that and see what kind of coverage would work best, because there's not going to be an officer 7 days a week, because we're still only going to have one officer that's assigned to the team. So there'll be it's one officer and then two mental health professionals. One is the case manager that we have now, and then the MHP that we're adding. We need to really look at how we get the most bang for our buck, where they can safely be out, and them going out on their own isn't necessarily the safest depending on the circumstances. So we have to kind of evaluate all of that to determine what the schedule is going to be.
So I noticed that assaults are down, which is a good thing, especially simple assault. It looks like when I look at the year-to-date figures. Are a high percentage of those still domestic violence, or now that everybody's kind of out and about again, is the domestic violence side getting better? Or what would you say is the driver on the drop in assaults?
I think they're coming out of COVID, and we did see the increase in domestic assaults during the pandemic. And I do think coming out of that, we're seeing a decrease in domestic violence assaults. That being said, the majority of the simple assaults that you see there are still domestic violence. They're just not as many as we had seen, but that probably is a safe assessment of what the decline is or what's contributing to it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Chief, we of course like the trends. How's that compared to our neighbors in statewide? Are they following the same pattern?
That's hard to say. It depends on the which crime it is. We don't have an easy way to pull numbers for everybody. What I can tell you is that we are not breaking homicide records like our neighbors to the north. And the other shootings that they're having are outpacing us by a mile. So that's I hesitate to say that out loud because I don't want to jinx us, but that when you talk about what's going on elsewhere, I look at our neighbors, and that's a pretty good barometer of what's happening elsewhere. As far as some of the property crimes, I get separate vehicle theft reports from PSAT, the Puget Sound Auto Theft Authority Task Force. Thank you. And other jurisdictions did not see the same decrease that we did during the third quarter. So we are making a little bit better strides in that area as well. So it's I I don't have every jurisdiction's full crime rates, but there's a couple things that I can point to and say with certainty that we are doing better than our neighbors.
And on the subject of the eludes and stolen cars and how they interface, is there any statistical backup for what seems to be an anecdotal observation that people flying around in stolen cars are hurting a lot of people, including themselves? It seems to be from the news that there's a spike in that, cars upside down, people run, it was stolen. Car hits somebody, people run, it was stolen. Have you observed that, or is there any way we can determine whether that's actually occurring? And not just in Lakewood, just generally with respect to the what I call the anti-chase legislation.
Right. I don't have anything statistically that I can point to. In Lakewood, we aren't seeing that spike. And it's, if you look at it as a percentage of eludes, it'd be really hard to say. You'd have to compare it to, what the percentage was before. And if that percentage is changing, or if it's the same percent and we're just seeing more eludes, that's if that is occurring.
Yeah, but outside the eludes, I've seen, it seems like every few days, see a car going 100 miles an hour that doesn't have a license plate.
Right.
And a car going 95 miles an hour that's got a broken out driver's side window, swerving. And well, there was another stolen car on the freeway, and then they get off and you read about them crashing. So sometimes I'm also interested in whether the non-eludes, who are just the car thieves joyriding at a high rate of speed, are causing more problems than the no pursuit rule could ever make up for.
Right. Well, we know that these people that are driving around, they're not using their turn signals and making sure that, they're belted in and following the speed limits. They're driving recklessly before we even get behind them. So that's just, there is an increased hazard to the public with more people being out in stolen cars and likely under the influence of fentanyl or something else.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah.
Any other questions for the chief? Mr. Branstetter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, in your presentation, you didn't mention specifically alarms or response to alarms. Is the alarm system that we have still healthy? Are there still lots of residential and business alarms, and are we not seeing an increase in responses to them with the advent of property crimes, or have we seen businesses because of COVID, fewer businesses or more businesses installing alarms?
Well, most of there's a couple topics to cover there. Alarms in general, the action that this council took maybe 10 years ago to update our alarm ordinance had a tremendous effect on the amount of false alarms that we go to. We don't go to nearly the number of false alarms that we used to. We just don't get dispatched at all to them anymore. So when we do get an alarm in, because of the way that the ordinance is structured, usually it's a valid burglary alarm. But we don't get too many of those either. As far as businesses go, most of the theft that they experience is shoplifting when they're open. And there's not an alarm for that. It's them just calling. So there isn't an alarm system for that would, where we would see an increase. So part of the reason why I don't report on alarms anymore is because they've become a pretty insignificant part of what we respond to.
Okay. when you were talking about the total accidents and it being down this quarter, and then you mentioned a dry October, is that a predictor that you think fourth quarter will be down even more?
Well, we'll have to see what the weather's like in November, and December, so.
Yeah. Okay, well, but as we have finished Veterans Drive and then as we finish Washington Boulevard, whomever tracks this within the department, it would be interesting to look at the accident history on the intersections where traffic circles have replaced two-way or four-way stops. To be able to go and do that to reassure ourselves that we've done a good thing. On the co-responder program, I know that you're promoting the officer out of the job. How is the interest and process to identify the next officer for that team?
I know that we've had at least one apply, and I don't, honestly, until it comes time to make the selection, I don't usually pay attention to how many people or who's applied, but I do know of one that has, and he would be a solid replacement for Jessica.
Is there a pay benefit that goes with obtaining that position like there are for some of the others in the department?
So there's it's technically a neighborhood police officer position, and there is a pay bump while you're in that position.
But it's the same as for the other neighborhood police officers.
Correct.
Not unique.
Correct.
Okay. One other area that you didn't touch on is response to drug overdoses or things to do that. You know, national news, we hear a lot about fentanyl and other drugs being a real problem, and we hear about that. Like firefighters, police officers have got to be prepared to deal medically with someone who's right on the cusp of being lost. How is that in the department? And have we got the right training in place for officers to quickly be able to deal with a situation that needs some immediate help?
We have a few years back, we issued we issued Narcan to our officers to administer when they have come across overdoses. And it's been put to use quite a few times. So they are, and it's simple to use. I mean, you don't need an advanced medical degree by any means to apply Narcan. And it's been out there, it's been used several times, and we are in an environment that allows for a pretty quick response from our fire department. So that in a lot of cases, they will get there either at the same time as us or maybe even shortly before or very shortly after. So they would be the primary ones to provide medical assistance. But there have been quite a few times where officers have gotten there first and medical aid wasn't going to get there in time, and they've administered Narcan and been successful.
And how is the hoped for timeline on body cameras playing out?
It is not a hoped for timeline. We have implemented body cameras. So
are you got everybody who you want to have a camera has one now?
Yes. I will say there's probably some stragglers out there that for one reason or another have been gone for different leaves and just haven't been, assigned the camera and gone through the training. But yeah, when you see officers out and about, you will likely see them wearing body cameras. And to follow up on that, our in-car cameras with Axon are still in in shipment. We're waiting for those to get here too.
And the tasers,
We got the new tasers that came with the body cameras, and that, again, it's a new, there's a little bit of newness to them, and it's a little bit of a different platform. So officers are having to go through training for that, and trying to train up a whole department takes time, but we have them and they're getting issued out.
okay, and my last question is, that you had a slide about the CAD reports about shootings and shots. And how does that translate into the total crimes picture? Or is that not necessarily going to result in a crime stat?
That's not necessarily going to result in a crime stat. It depends on if somebody's hit, if somebody was shot at, and reports it as an assault, or if property was damaged. Those would be reported as crimes, but outside of that, it's likely would not have an effect on, as reported on our crime stats.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Very good. Any other questions? Members of council? Just a couple quick ones from me on the felony type bookings. Are we having challenges with Pierce County still, or are we successfully able to get the folks booked?
We are having challenges still. We will, there are times when we can call down and plead our case for certain individuals. But there are times too when traditionally, I think Councilmember Bell heard from a business owner here in Lakewood who's somebody, a drug user, broken in to steal food items. And we'd actually caught him falling out of the drive-through window when we got there. And because of some injuries he sustained, he was rejected by the jail. And that one was actually at Nisqually because of the injuries. But at Pierce County, they wouldn't take a burglary charge. So what we end up doing is charging him with the misdemeanors of trespass and vandalism, so we can handle them ourselves, and then we can get them booked, that person booked into the Nisqually jail. We actually do have more success at that. What we have done is there are people like the person that Councilmember Bell had heard about, who we will call down and work with them to make an exception for. But some of that depends on the felony prosecutor as well. And in this case, we talked to him and he said, well, in all honesty, given the totality of the circumstances, it's probably we get more done by having it handled in our court than in the felony court. So, and that's from their prosecutor.
Is that from capacity challenges still?
Some capacity, in the jail, some of it's COVID, some of it's capacity and it's staffing. That is what that comes back to. The prosecutor's part, I couldn't really speak to that.
Right. What's the update on the recent successes with the rash of carjackings and sort of armed or strong arming robberies?
The group that was taken into custody Thursday or Friday was the central group. There's others out there that were probably participated in some form or another. But the primary group were taken into custody that night. All but one were juveniles, one as young as 14. And to see just how violent their actions were is unnerving. And that same investigator came out, I think on Saturday, working with the Tacoma detective to work on some leads that they had for some of their cases. And were able to recover a couple more of the stolen cars and at least get those back to the victims.
Any idea where their parents are? I mean, did they go down to juvenile to pick their kids up? Did they have a chance to interact with?
I could tell you that one of them was a runaway whose mother, not from Lakewood, from Steilacoom, whose mother was just at her wit's end and didn't know what to do with them. One of the others is dad is very strong supporter of law enforcement, do the right thing kind of a person, but also works 16 hours a day. And that's the 14-year-old, and that's, somebody that's clearly needs a lot more supervision, but
Guidance,
yeah.
Do you have a question?
Do you know if there's any help for these kids that are in trouble like that? Raymond Hall, do they do counseling and help them for them?
Raymond Hall says they do a lot, so hopefully they follow up with that and actually, intervene with some of these families and provide some support and services.
Hate to see that's like that happen, so, no, thank you.
Well, in the absence of any other questions, thank you for your continuing work and the work of your department. It's great to see the new hires coming on board.
Thank you all.
And I look forward to another ride along when I can coordinate. I was trying to do one this month, but schedules didn't work, so we'll work it again.
24/7, so
What's that?
we're 24/7, so.
Yeah, exactly. And I work most of the 20 or the 4.
Thank you all.
Get there, though. Thank you. Yep. I suppose we paid for that guy to have hospital care. Oh, even better. Great. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, next we have our Deputy City Manager, Todd Kraus, who will provide us a review of the 2023 property tax levy. So, welcome, Ms. Kraus.
So the property tax levy that I'm presenting to you this evening is very similar with past proposed levies. So the bottom line is the assessed value increased by $1.6 million and the levy rate decreased by 10 cents. So if the city council were to approve, which is a recommended increase of 1%, that would equate to a levy rate of 71 cents compared to last year's of 81 cents per 1,000. The average tax paid by the average home owner of 545,000 is $372 per year for the city of Lakewood portion. So the recommendation is for the city council to approve a 1% levy increase, and that'll go to the public hearing on November 7th and scheduled for adoption on November 21st. And
So
that concludes my presentation.
Before I turn it over, I'm going to ask a question or at least make a point. So based on the information presented and the decreased levy rate, I think it's fair to say that the reason we're experiencing a decreased levy rate is because of the significant work we've done in part to increase the vote in terms of commercial activity in the city.
New construction, yes.
Absolutely. So that definitely helps us all. Any question for Ms. Kraus? Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In response to the mayor's last comment, is that really true when the percentage of assessed property that is commercial is decreasing compared to the percentage that's residential? As your chart show?
So overall, the assessed value increases, but we're still limited to the 1% plus any new construction. So if we're adding new construction, then the city will benefit from that.
Okay. So when I looked at the taxable values, commercial and residential chart, it looks like we're expecting that from 2020 through 2023, the percentage of commercial property value is going from 39 to 38 to 37 and is projected to be 36. Is that because the assessor is more rapidly inflating the value of residential property. Even though we have more commercial property, the percentage of our assessed value of our property as a percentage is, commercial property is going down as opposed to residential. And at one time, back in 2012 or 2013, we were thinking that we wanted to really make an effort to try to get. Actually, we were hoping that we could get into the high 40s to do that. But and so while we built a lot of commercial investment, it doesn't seem to have generated that increase of where it's shifting the property tax burden from residential to commercial. It in fact is in the last 4 years going the other way. But is there anything? Is there anything policy-wise that the council, the city could do about that other than trying to influence the county assessor to not keep inflating the value of residential property?
Did you have a question before Ms. Kraus answers that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the question, I might have
Go ahead. If you want to address Mr. Branstad, I think Mr. Anderson had a comment or something that might be.
policy wise, I don't know
Maybe.
how that shifts the property tax. I don't know what policy the council could put in place to shift that.
Yeah, it is, because we want to try to have balanced growth, right? Mr. Anderson on that real quick, and then we can just have a general discussion.
Here. Yeah, that would kind of be an attempt at a Soviet-controlled economy. Because it's all real estate economics. Residential real estate has skyrocketed in value. And when you think about it very simply, commercial property hasn't gone up, at least not as much, because people are less willing to rent a retail store or a strip mall. And people are working at home and there's less need for office space. So commercial markets in general across the country have not thrived the way residential real estate markets have. And so the balance changes, and that may swing back at some point, but it's not something a city council controls. It's something greater economic forces control. You can only react to it.
We have benefited by the industrial and warehousing construction.
If we didn't have that, there'd be even greater burden on I guess that's my point. If there'd be even greater burden on the residential property taxpayers if we did not have that commercial property, because that proportion would be even more out of balance.
Mr. Moki.
Yeah, I would agree with Councilmember Anderson. If you look at the numbers, the peak in residential prior was 2009, which is right after the big run up. And remember, they lag, the assessor lags years on valuations. And so the 67% peak was in 2009, which was the peak of the real estate bubble. And then you can see it fall off. And then that's when you saw the big jump in commercial, which peaked at 39% as early as 2014 and 2015, as Councilmember Branstad mentioned. And then now we've just had this huge run up in the valuation of houses, right? I mean, just in no commercial properties, I don't think. So we do need to bring on more commercial, because once residential valuations moderate again, it'll be a problem, right? And so we do want more commercial to try to balance that out. But Yeah, I was surprised at that figure too with all the growth. But I just think that the overall increase in the value of residential properties, and I don't know where apartments are counted in. On these, if it's a commercial or residential, is just kind of overwhelmed anything we can do on the commercial side right now. But as those moderate in the next couple of years, maybe the commercial side, or depending on how much more new construction we have on the commercial side, we hopefully will see that number come back up towards closer to 40 again, which seems like a pretty good goal. That's all I gotta say.
One other comment, in talking with commercial real estate brokers, one of the surprising areas is that the, to Mr. Bulkey's point, the apartments, the lower end apartments have in some cases more than doubled in value in the market because there's of the rise in rents and the occupancy rate. So when they do the equation on what their return on investment is, it's driven the price of the more so even than single family homes. So
I know the multifamily projects have really gone up in value. You see people chasing 1031 dollars in some of these projects, and they're getting some significant cap rates on them. So it's interesting to see. But the good thing is, for purpose of tonight, is that our levy rate is decreased a little bit. Of course, the question is against what value per thousand, right? And that's the challenge. When you see home prices gone up 16 to 20%, then you've got, okay, 10 cents down in the levy rate, but you've got 20% increase on the valuation. So, are you saving any money as a homeowner? Not much.
And there's also to the point that Councilmember Branster was making is homes, they're easy to revalue, right? Because there's sales in the neighborhood and they know, and their models tell them that. But a warehouse, and I also think that the guys who own warehouses are much more likely to be really good at knowing the value and challenging those valuations when they come up. Is what I would guess too. Yeah, they're very good at it.
Well, very good. Anything else on the property tax levy? Any concerns, questions about adopting 1%? It's an option. It's not a mandatory. So if not, okay, we'll go to the review of the year-end 2022 budget adjustment. Again, we have our Deputy City Manager, Todd Kraus, for this.
So this is probably the shortest budget adjustment. The two items that I want to highlight that has an impact on the general fund is the transfer to the SSMCP fund for the future North Zone, Clear Zone purchases. And this is for the due diligence. The other one is to purchase cones and delineators of 20,000 that can be used for parks events and public works, as well as for the police department. The other adjustments are primarily grant related or are specific to a special revenue fund. So there's limited use on what those funds can be used for. This is also going to a public hearing on November 7th and a adoption scheduled for November 21st.
Call me silly. I know what a cone is. What's a delineator?
Well, just by the term itself, I should have looked this up.
I mean, physically,
So-
what does it look like?
The cones to separate, that's what I'm looking at, delineators. In my mind, it just seemed natural, but now that you asked me the technical question, I probably should have.
I don't know if it's a
exactly
little
what it looked
orange
like.
thing or if it's a.
Yeah,
The city manager knows because he knows all. He is Mr. Definition section
And
code.
Mayor, you're giving me way too much credit. So it's those kind of pylons that connect to each other. They're circular tubes.
You have one for us, Mr. Bodie?
Yeah.
Oh, the white things.
Yeah, actually, they come in, they're orange and white and they're, yeah, there you go. Yep,
Okay,
there you go.
but I did learn balusters from him.
there you go. Yeah, sorry to be dense, but I wasn't sure what a delineator was, so. Yeah, and a delineator, right, exactly.
And we were actually spending quite a bit of money. We didn't realize citywide renting these for special events. And so The staff did a real quick fiscal analysis and realized it'd be much more efficient just to buy them and have them on hand.
$4,500 per event versus the 20.
Where do we store them? Out in the barns somewhere?
Yeah.
Shops, okay, great. Any questions of Ms. Kraus on her adjustments? Going once, going twice, going to the next one. So we got our review of the 6-year financial forecast.
Okay, so the 6-year financial forecast is just a snapshot in time. So this is the estimate that was put together back in September. We're in a period of uncertainty. And so what we have is on the first scenario is the current forecast. And in the current forecast, and this is looking out at 25 and 26, since we already put together 23 and 24, and we'll do a mid-biennial review as part of that adoption. For 2025 and 2026, we're looking at the next biennium, we're seeing about a $430,000 operating revenue short of operating expenditures and about $1 million in 2026. And looking at it from an ending fund balance perspective, we needed to maintain a certain level of reserves plus the economic development opportunity fund, which is not programmed as an expenditure in here. We're short about $2 million in ending fund balance in 25 and in 26, $5.2 million. That again, keeping in mind, this is just a snapshot. When we close out the year, we'll have a better idea. And after receiving some revenues for 23, we'll have a better idea somewhat and what the economy will be like. But again, as we experienced in the last few years, it's been a lot of uncertainty. So on the next page, you'll see the scenario 2, which is more optimistic. And in 25 and 26, with an assumption that operating revenues could grow by 2% and that we'll realize some operating efficiencies, well, could have a 1% expenditure savings each year. That operating gap is now in a better position. So we will actually meet the financial policies in terms of operating revenues, meeting or exceeding operating expenditures. We are able to recover a good portion of the ending fund balance, but still short about 800,000 in 2025 and about 3.1 million in 2026. And I just want to emphasize this is just a snapshot. So that's where we're looking at in terms of the general fund, which is our primary operating fund.
I have a quick question on the Economic Opportunity Fund, the set aside. I know that that's a set aside budgeted per year, but do we accumulate those? Isn't that our intent?
No, the intent was to accumulate $2 million and then at council's discretion to use that $2 million for economic development programs. That doesn't mean that the city council couldn't change the amount that they want set aside.
If we don't use it in 23, it doesn't roll over into 24 to make a $4 million set
No,
aside.
no, no. It's just set at $2 million right now.
Unless we change our policy on that.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean to say that if there were excess funds from 2022, for example, that you couldn't put it into economic development. It's just a designating a dollar amount for that purpose.
So right now in that bucket for our year end, we got $2 million in there that we haven't used.
Yes.
Right, okay. Questions, Mr. Branstetter?
Yeah, on the economic development set aside, so that it's essentially there if an opportunity comes up that we can do that. And it's, as a council, we chose the number 2 million. Okay, whereas the other reserves, we chose a percentage. So the 2 million in 2028 is not really the same as the 2 million in 2022.
Sure.
You know, so there's no inflator and it wasn't included as a percentage. So it would seem if we wanted to have it grow so that we had 2 million in 2022 dollars, how do we put, what kind of a formula do we put in place to do that. Because, it seems to me that we should want 2 million in 2022 dollars in that,
Or more.
in that fund. I mean, just in 2022, we put it there. But the way we did it, we just told you it's 2 million forever until 50 years from now, 2 million will buy you a box of candy bars, which is important,
They might cost you that much, but,
It is at the.
But I guess what kind of recommendation would you have if we wanted to put some growth into that to match the value of money?
Sure. So that is at the city's council's discretion if you want to increase that. I can't remember if we actually set in the dollar amount in the ordinance itself. If it is in the ordinance, then we would just amend the ordinance. If it's not in the ordinance, if the city council desires to increase that, we could increase it. If there's year-end savings from 2022, we could add to it, and it would just be a memorialized in the budget adjustment or something.
I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know why we wouldn't want. to
My
increase that.
recollection is that 2 years ago, we just put it in the budget ordinance for this current biennium we're in now. And we put 2 million in there, and then we have a proposed budget for the next biennium that also just has 2 million in it. But I don't know if we really wanted to keep the value of that the same, what should be the new number for the 2023-24 biennium?
Mr. Caulfield had a point, perhaps.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this fund was created in 21 and 22. It was actually $1 million in 21 and $1 million in 22. And how that came about was solely based on available one-time money and the goal of the council to create an economic opportunity fund. So that's how the 2 million came about. The 23-24 proposed budget recommends us taking a look at that and having the council take action on actually allocating some of those funds in 23 and 24 for economic development purposes. My recommendation would be, once you figure out and determine what you want to use these monies for or programs, then you come back and you add to it over a period of time. Just a suggestion, rather than just adding money to it at this point in time, my recommendation would be, hey, you got $2 million right here. Let's figure out what you want to do. And then as we look out into the near and midterm, we can certainly add more one-time monies to it, once you figure out what you want to do. Because that could be, your economic development opportunity could be, the need for an additional $500,000. It could be the need for another 4 or 5 million, depending upon the project or the initiative you want to undertake. So just food for thought.
Certainly worthy of a thought. My thought is, as we get to that point, the economic development opportunity might be presented to us in a very unique way in any given year. And it would be wonderful to have more money than less and have something that's actual as opposed to aspirational, but I thought over time, something we can think about. But at least we've got 2 million this year, and I think the concept of growth makes sense to figure that out. That's something we can noodle on over the budget process. Okay. Very good. Anything else?
Not on my end.
Any other questions for Ms. Kraus on this particular item? Mr. Anderson, did you have no? Anyone else? Very good. Well, apparently you can't get rid of us that soon because you're up for the next one. So the review of the ordinance related to the protection and preservation of public spaces. That's actually not you. I think you're done, right?
Yeah, I was gonna wing that one if you wanted me to.
Well, I was hopeful that we would just
Thank you.
keep it here. Because, since we were stumping you on delineators, we might stump you on this one. Come on down, Ms. Wachter.
I can't compete with somebody who comes in with bags of candy. and then can tell you about our finances.
Exactly.
Instead, you just get me a simple lawyer trying to navigate what appear to be some interesting waters that we're all in with the issue of preserving our public spaces. And so I prepared a memo for you. The bottom line in all of this comes down to a court's ability to say that a city was detaining or enforcing on someone because they're homeless. And the courts have found new and interesting ways to get to that conclusion. So in other words, what we say is somebody who is maybe congesting a sidewalk or something like that. If they're actually obstructing a sidewalk, we're okay. But if it's just off to the side, what they'll say is sleeping outdoors is a necessary and integral part of being homeless when there's nowhere else to sleep. And therefore, when you detain that person, you're actually getting them for their status as a homeless person rather than removing them for other reasons. And so as long as that remains a theme with the courts, we are looking at a little bit of a challenge. What I've included for you are a number of different jurisdictions and their ways of approaching it. The sample resolution that I gave you is one that's most closely patterned. I believe it was after Edmonds, but it's similar to many of them. And it essentially just says, you don't enforce if you don't have some place to take them. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I put most of what I had to say in the written piece, and I know you don't want me to just read the cases back to you, so.
So having a location to take one who is exhibiting homelessness or is homeless, that's got to be more than theoretical, right?
Correct. And in fact, the court in the Grants Pass case went to a new level by saying that if you have, I'm making these numbers up, but if you have 800 homeless people and you only have 600 beds, you de facto do not have enough beds for this person that you're currently detaining. Now that's going a lot further than what previous courts have done, but I'm not exaggerating when I told you the courts are going to a certain place with this. And that is what the concern is from a legal perspective.
So the camping on public property reference to Martin and the city of Boise. I mean, we effectively say no camping in our parks overnight.
Correct. Correct.
So what's the distinction with the difference here?
The distinction is that a park is closed to everyone at that hour.
Got it. And the streets aren't necessarily, so.
The streets are there for the public 24/7,
Got it.
365.
Okay. Questions of Ms. Wachter? Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that the definition of public property is too narrow. And that it should encompass all publicly owned property owned by any entity. And have an exception for where the entity that is the steward of that property has actually granted permission. I think that we can have a decent argument that under the police powers given to the city, that we have the ability through the criminal statutes to protect all public property. And there's a reason for that, because public property is like in the case of an adverse possession case, public property is accepted because there isn't somebody there all the time, like a private owner would normally be at a house or tending their field. There's public property everywhere that doesn't have a day-to-day steward, and people look to the city as the enforcement and relief mechanism for that. And that would, apply to a library, it would apply to WashDOT property, it would apply to the back corner of a school ground, and you don't have to wait till Monday morning when the administration shows up to do something about it. So I'd like to see an option that we could consider that would be broader and have the exception for if the library board wants to take action and set up a safe parking site in the library parking lot, and that's in compliance with other codes and regulations. That's their conscious decision, but in the absence of that, having options, it's a tool, not that you're going to allocate the resources to that, but a tool for the cases that actually need it. So.
Anything else, Mr. Boki?
I get a kick out of, they go into the grants pass decision, but then it emphasizes in this, and I have some MRSC article, which basically takes what you have and but they wanted to emphasize it as a narrow decision, right? So they're always saying it's narrow, but at the same time, kind of expanding. We're making it more difficult. So I guess for a layman like myself, I'm a little bit confused. I'm also intrigued by the loophole in the whole thing seems to be the cleanliness clause that I guess Tacoma has used and some other entities have used, basically saying, well, if you're within, and I guess we could do that too, right? If you're within 300 feet of any body of water, creek, or anything like that. And I mean, I see that as the loophole you can drive the truck through, right? Like, well, you have to provide for your own sanitation, for instance. Yeah, where you're homeless, we understand that, and we're not criminalizing that, but I mean, could we do something like that?
I think your point about the language that says that these decisions are narrowly construed is a good one. Every once in a while in an area of law, it takes several court cases before the thing is fully played out. And I would predict that one of the upcoming places is the competition between our ability to preserve our environment. And if you take Councilmember Anderson's point, protection of our public places, our ability to protect our environment and our public places versus the rights of people who don't have anywhere else to go to simply sleep outside. And I don't think from what I'm seeing in these cases, we're there yet. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that there will be some test cases coming out on that. It seemed like, and I did watch the Tacoma discussion as they were getting to their decision on that. I did not watch all the public comment, but in their discussion, they were very specific about saying that when you have fair-sized encampments that are near water, because there is no infrastructure to support them, the product of those people living together has nowhere else to go. And so there is a threat to the water system, and they specifically referenced the Department of Ecology. In Tacoma, with a 9-member council, it was a 6-3 vote, and none of them seemed thrilled with the action that they were needing to take, but they felt like they didn't have a lot of other good options.
Councilmember Bell, you have some perspective?
I
from
do,
Mr.
thank you,
Kent?
Mr. Mayor. So I would like to encourage that we have some sort of environmental factor worked in like the other cities. It is important, and then you are correct, City Attorney. You have a great amount of people in a very compact area, and they're creating, damage to the water system. There's waste from them that gets in that affects everybody else too. So besides the actual people, but the environment, maybe it's the fish, the habitat, things like that. So I think that we definitely need some sort of environmental clause or something put in there
Health and safety. Yeah.
for public safety. Thank you.
So here's the question, is there WCIA defense provided to a challenge to an ordinance like this?
My favorite lawyer term, it would depend. It would depend on what the complaint is. It would depend on what the action the city takes is.
I guess I'm just thinking out loud whether they would strike it down on some sort of constitutionality basis. Is that what they've done? in the
That
other
is what
cases?
they've been pursuing as constitutional bases. cruel and unusual, I think is.
Rights of
one.
assembly.
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Branstetter, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Walker, in the draft ordinance that was attached to your memorandum, that there's a section 4, and it says unlawful occupation of public property is hereby created to read unless caused by city action or otherwise authorized by city code, city contract or permit, it shall be unlawful for any person to occupy public property. And then occupy is defined up above, that is essentially setting up someplace to stay overnight. That, is that similar language to some
Yes.
other municipalities?
Yes, sorry, I wasn't more clear. That I believe is Edmund's language. Many of them have language that is a lot like this, where they're saying that they have enforcement ability for just this kind of conduct, unless the person is homeless and can't find a place to sleep, and then they abandon all hope of enforcement. Now, the cities that were mentioned, Tacoma and Kent, and I believe also Spokane, are the cities that have carved out something additional, saying that these encampments create a burden on ecologically sensitive areas. And so those ordinances look slightly different than this one, but they come down in a couple different categories. This was the category that you're apparently rejecting because you're interested in seeing the ecological piece, which is fine. We can go back and do that. This is an initial discussion, just trying to get a feel for where we want to go with this.
Then in section 6 under about enforcement, it says we won't enforce it if there is no available overnight shelter that can be used by that particular person.
Correct.
And then it says if available overnight shelter is available, the shelter space must be offered to the person experiencing homelessness along with other available human services. Why the provision about saying other available human services if we're just talking about shelter or staying somewhere?
The objective in these ordinances across the board has been to protect the public space and not be unduly burdensome on the person. And therefore, if you encounter somebody in that situation, they would undoubtedly need the services. And the cities, I believe, are trying to demonstrate that this is not simply about removing people. This is actually about helping them. And I can tell you again, after watching Tacoma's debate, that was part of the struggle, was that they do want to help people. They don't want the impact that is resulting from the previous efforts that don't seem to be working.
Well, I think that there's a corollary there in that you have people that don't want services. They don't want the rules that come with going to a place that's available shelter, but you have to also participate in the services. You know, it's sort of a disincentive to use the shelter space. You know, it's not the same as saying that. And this doesn't particularly address one way or the other, offering the shelter space to someone. There's not anything that I read in the ordinance that talks about and offering them transportation to it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is again, a barrier to a person being able to accept the offer to be able to do that. And I think that if we are going to adopt this, we need to really decide what is our inventory of shelter spaces that this can apply, that is going to be available. I mean, we you know, we have 12 spaces somewhere, but are we going to expand and say that it's, we'll look to deal with spaces in Lakewood or in Pierce County or in some radius of the place where the person is. And that would seem to require the police officer to have a listing of available beds in order to be able to deal with this. And I'm not sure we have the mechanism in place, and I don't know that it would get us to very far now. I agree with Councilmember Anderson that I would like to have something other than just some city property be addressed by the ordinance, and I'd like for it to be public spaces unless the public entity has specifically taken action to exclude their space.
You know, I think, Mr. Anderson, and then Ms. Farmer.
So here's the way it's presently working in practice. I've signed or passed on literally tens of millions of dollars worth of homelessness contracts. There is not a night that has gone by that didn't have an available shelter bed in Pierce County. The resistance to going in is very strong. If you get somebody to show up, they're entered into the HMIS, the Housing Management Information System, which is countywide. It's something HUD approves of, and they're logged in as individuals, and there is an attempt to connect them with services that they might be in need of, like mental health counseling, permanent housing is a common one, domestic violence, sheltering, and relocation, different things that are available in the human services context. But there are really three. You call in, if you call Tacoma Rescue Mission, Lehigh, at Hosmer, and Catholic Community Services, you're going to find a shelter bed. The problem is that the people that will be the continuing problem take no responsibility. And there's only two ways that you can get somebody in: persuasion and coercion. Persuasion isn't working. Coercion is limited because of jail capacity, lack of political will to enforce societal norms, and the lack of involuntary drug treatment. So this is an attempt to kind of beef up persuasion, I would say here. We'll give you an opportunity to get better, to get dry, to get clean in more ways than one. And people have to take some personal responsibility. If it's in some ways you throw back, there's a great article in a liberal newspaper in San Francisco about the history of charity as opposed to government contracting secular help. And in the past, well, government can't impose a religious component. There was a bargain that was struck between the folks who needed the help, were homeless, hobos, drifters, etc., where there were a lot of sewing shops and wood chopping places that had been set up depression-wise, where people would expect to work if they were able-bodied to get their meal, get their shelter. That was the bargain. And if they couldn't, their efforts were used by the charity to help people who truly couldn't help themselves. So there have been a lot of societal changes, but one of the things that changed was that when that was pushed off into the government, there's no quid for the pro quo. Here's the stuff. We don't expect anything for it. So I think what we're asking here is to expect some very limited degree of personal responsibility. And all that takes is saying, it's very hard for people who are drug addled. Yes, I want help. I'll take your help.
Mr. Brandstetter's point, I wonder though, how do we facilitate the best chance of getting that person to yes with transportation? Because that seems to be a logistical issue. Do we transport them down to the available shelter?
I've been on a ride along, gave somebody a courtesy ride to Bonnie Lake.
Right.
The bus is $2 and they don't even care if, as you know, they don't even click. If you walk on without the fare, they won't do anything. Right. Number one will take you right there.
Or maybe budget Uber passes or something, whatever it takes just to, help facilitate moving them from point A.
If somebody's willing to go, transportation is probably the least of the problem since it's a lot cheaper than other things.
Do you have another follow-up comment, Mr. Branstetter, on that or? Fair point. Whether they'll do it or not is the question, right? They, at least the way this is drafted, they're offered shelter, and if they elect not to take it, then they need to move along, is the way I read the ordinance.
And under this ordinance, if this were to be adopted, yes, we offer them shelter, they decline, and then we can take enforcement action at that point.
Which could include simply asking them to move along.
True.
As
There's
opposed to
always
issuing,
officer
yeah.
discretion in any of these situations. And I can tell you, you have, and I did talk to them briefly in doing some of this work. Your behavioral health contact team is nothing short of phenomenal. They know who they're dealing with. They know if the person they're talking to is somebody who's been there for months. They know if the person they're talking to seems to be new in the area. They just really know their business quite well.
Do you have a comment or question, Deputy Mayor?
It's kind of a concern, not a concern, but are we trying to be proactive? Because we really don't have a huge issue. A few people, yes, but are we being proactive to add something to the message to make it clear so that we have an option? Is that the purpose of this?
The purpose would be more in the hands of the council's will.
Yeah. Well, I think the purpose of it is to add, from what I understand, some additional tools in our toolbox to facilitate the avoidance of problems created by inappropriate camping in public places, on public lands, where it could create not only just a nuisance physically, but a nuisance environmentally, and certainly a health and safety issue for the surrounding businesses and adjacent private property owners that have raised many of these issues to us. The challenge is, how do you feasibly create such an ordinance consistent with applicable law as we understand it, and in recognition of the logistical challenges that are apparent with physically getting someone to go to an available shelter to say, yes, I'd love to have help tonight. But I don't have the ability to get with my shopping cart in 5 bags of items, either on the bus or down to the new Community First Village in Spanaway or wherever it's going to be. So that's something we have to kind of think through from a budgetary standpoint. The ordinance would be one step forward. Execution would be another. Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, and one other concern that I have as well, I have with the ordinances and if you don't accept it, then we'll offer you shelter in the jail, you know, that we're going to have, I think, a good number of days, despite the fact that there looks like there's shelter space in Pierce County. I don't know that that means it's readily available to a person who is in front of a city hall. Okay, and as we have a great deal of interest in the community to work to address this problem, and we pass this ordinance, the community folks, they're going to say, oh, great, every time I see a homeless person who's getting ready to spend the night someplace, I'll just call the police and they'll be gone. You know, and I don't know that we've got all of the pieces in place to actually cause that to happen, and we're going to have a problem with expectations. Until we put the logistics in place that says that we can actually physically do this. Like First Village concept is fine, but that's, once it gets going on, it's just going to have a waiting list. It's going to be like trying to get a housing voucher. Aspen Court is going to become like that in another 8 months. You know, so we're, you know, trying to see what's going on. I don't know what will come about our responses to our RFP, where we're looking to create something. VASA isn't looking to get into the overnight emergency shelter business. They're in the supportive housing business. And I don't want to put our police officers in a case of where we're encouraging them to harass people. I think the behavioral health contact team, they have talked to us and given us feedback about individuals that finally on the 8th or 9th contact, the person agreed to go to a shelter space. You know, this is much less flexible than that. Other than the provision that says that the police chief is going to be able to make the rules about how that works, which he's going to have to implement departmental policy.
Well, I think the condition precedent is embodied in this current draft, which is there has to be a shelter available. Number one, right? And number two, we can, like we do with other ordinances, we can set an effective date that is out a ways, similar to the anticipated tree preservation ordinance, to give us enough time to educate the public and to assemble those resources. So there's a mechanism by which, because I know our police officers haven't done the ride along recently, they have a card, they have a sheet for where people can go. What they don't necessarily have is the real-time availability of what beds are available at space A or B or C that night. And that may be something that Pierce County can work on. It might take some time. I don't know. Mr. Anderson or Mr. Boki may know better than I on that. But yeah, I don't know that those should be impediments to us necessarily moving forward with an ordinance that still allows discretion with the officers. It makes a statement, it provides some enforceability, and it does, I think it does communicate to the public that we are intent on not allowing people to just willy-nilly camp in public places.
I will take the comments and discussion that have been held here and work on providing you follow-up just in terms of responsiveness to some of the issues that you've indicated interest in and in potential modifications to the presented ordinance. It's probably not coming back next study session, we may
Right, we've got some time.
let it out a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this will be something that will come back at an opportune moment in the study sessions.
Any other comments for the good of the order to give further guidance to the city attorney? You feel like you got enough meat for the
We-
bones there?
I'll tell you something the manager says to me every once in a while. It's a good start.
Exactly. No, I appreciate the work.
Now he's giving me the look.
Well, we would allow you to leave the hot seat, but no, you are on the hot seat for the next item, which is the review of the naming of the Motor Avenue Plaza to Community Plaza or something else.
And I need to apologize to the council, you know, when you're proofing something, if you've looked at it enough times, suddenly you're blind to it. There is apparently no such thing as the Motor Avenue Plaza. It's been referred to as the Colonial Plaza.
Right.
It's near Motor Avenue. Somehow those things.
I thought that was another alternative name choice.
Yeah,
Good for you.
I am not weighing in on any of the names for this plaza. And this is the first time you're going to be using your new naming policy. And what you would do in this instance is you would get council direction on it, because right now I believe we have an interest. I don't know if it is the council speaking with one voice. And that
Right.
is the start of the project, unless somebody brings an individual has a different channel that they would go through.
So we had sufficient interest to bring it before us tonight, and that's where we are appropriately for discussion purposes.
Correct.
Yeah. Sure, in just a prelude, the city manager, city attorney has given us the resolution on the naming procedures, which we all are familiar with since we adopted that fairly recently. And I believe Ms. Councilmember Farmer brought this to our attention with the concurrence of another one or two of us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am interested in making sure that this plaza has a proper name. And whether or not that is based on its historical connection to the actual Motor Avenue, or whether we look at some sort of other name like the proposed Unity Plaza or Community Plaza, I am open to the actual name. But the current, it is being referred to by different names, and there's a lot of discussion around those names. And so it's odd to me that there isn't an actual name. And so I think the council has a unique opportunity to right that situation. And I look forward to the discussion. I'm open to what name it takes. I would just like it to be formalized.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I share Councilmember Farmer's openness to a name that's a single name that's definitive. You know, I didn't realize until this process started that doesn't seem anybody knows where Colonial Plaza name came from, because even in Norton Clapp's 1990s obituary, he was referred to as the founder of the Lakewood Center. So the people who started it and owned it didn't call it Colonial Plaza. So that's not its name. I have a problem of community with capital letters for unity in, you know, social media parlance, that's shouting. Or putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable.
Right.
So I'd rather it be something other than community with capital letters on half of it, but I'm open to considering a name, even if it was Unity Plaza with a capital U and lowercase letters, but
And Villa Plaza was more in the town center, right, as opposed to over there
yeah.
historically, yeah. This
Villa
is
Plaza, it was, but it was actually a villa before for the nuns, so.
Right. over by.
At least it was based on its real name.
Mr. Branstetter, and then I think Mr. Boki, did you have a point?
Well, I think that yeah, it is important for the place to have a name that is used consistently, at least used consistently by the city. When we were creating the improvements there, and we all of our discussions within the council was all talking about Motor Avenue. Motor Avenue Complete Street Project, being able to go through and do that. And so it didn't really occur to me that we needed to create an official name because it was Motor Avenue. You know, if you want to add the term plaza on there, then maybe we need to do that. The space is really significant historically. That you know, it sits in a place of where essentially solidified the name Lakewood that ultimately became the name of our city. Because before Mr. Clapp built the shopping center and called it the Lakewood Center, that some people said, well, this area out here is the Lakes District, and some called it, referred to it as Clover Park, and there were other things. But with the creation of the Lakewood Center, and it became a destination. It was a truly innovative, you know, doesn't look like any of today's shopping centers and malls, but in its day, it was truly innovative, and it became a destination. And then it became a destination that they were running at trolley lines to. Hence the Motor Avenue designation, which was designated as to where these trolley lines were going to be, and was being able to go and do that. We haven't done a good job as a city, I think, exploiting the significance both of the name of the street, Motor Avenue, and of doing that. But if we are truly in our vision want to be a city that's inspired by our history, then I don't know if we need to do anything as relates to the ordinance to append the word plaza to the place, because it already officially is Motor Avenue. And I would certainly, with any names going on, that would retain this. We don't have that many places in Lakewood that have significant historical significance. We're making efforts to deal with the historical significance of the the Nisqually presence, and of looking at Fort Steilacoom and being able to go and do that. But so this is an area that we need to choose a name and then do the things that go with the name to help educate people about how this is important to the history of our community. I, like Mr. Anderson, I am not at all supportive of community plaza. You know, it was a play on words that served as a good marketing line for our, you know, 20th anniversary series of events in that year that we did, and was used, and it was done effectively that. But it's kind of like the no I in team play on words to be able to go and do that. And I wouldn't want to lose the ability to highlight the historical significance of this area by going outside of that, that realm. If we decide we want to explore a name other than Motor Avenue, I think we should then follow the resolution and say, we're interested in a name, whether it should remain Motor Avenue or it should be something else, and solicit the recommendations like the resolution says. And we will get some. I mean, let's be honest, we've already at one point in time gotten one. And we would get some others. But my preference would be to just retain Motor Avenue and decide whether or not whether Plaza can just be the referral to the Plaza at Motor Avenue, or whether we need to do something official.
Ms. Farmer?
I guess that is a question. The street is named, when it turns into a plaza, it's not. And so is this something we could do administratively, or would we actually need to take legal action?
I was corrected on what I had put on the memo when I said Motor Avenue Plaza. Motor Avenue is an avenue or a street or it's a place to travel through. It is not now, nor have I understood it to be a plaza. I can echo something that Councilmember Branstetter had said. It may have a variety of different names as far as what people recognize. So I don't think Motor Avenue Plaza is necessarily one of them. Well, it might be one of them, there may be many, but it's not one of the more frequent ones that I've heard. And I guess the one other thing I would say, because I was reminded of this also by the city manager, he was asking me about, because he had heard from some folks the idea of naming streets. When you get into the business of renaming streets, that is a whole nother kettle of fish, because then you start talking about people's addresses and things like that. So you need to be aware that there's more layers than just this one.
It's an interesting place issue that we have, because it is a street. You do drive through it on a regular basis. And then when there's a special event, it turns into a plaza. And we refer to it consistently as some sort of plaza or place that we host events. And so,
I got a solution.
oh, please.
What is iconic about that space other than the history? Exactly. Exactly. It's the theater and that tower that is visible historically and from a logo standpoint, Theater Square at Motor Avenue. How about something as simple as that? Theater Square at Motor Avenue. Yeah.
That doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Theater Square at Motor Avenue,
But I just,
from a marketing standpoint.
if it absent something better, I just call it Theater Square. Motor Avenue is the address, but it's, kind of facetiously, we could refer to it as the Complete Streets Active Transportation and Public Gathering Space Project, also known as Motor Avenue.
Stop.
Which sounds like something BSRC would come up with. But there'd be a tax attached to it.
Maybe the best thought is to actually circulate.
But
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the best thought is to follow up consistent with the proposal, which is subparagraph D, and solicit suggestions for names from community organizations and individuals. Ms. Bell.
Thank you. So, yeah, I do think that we have kind of a branding issue here. It's known as quite a few different things that are pretty solid with people. So whatever it is decided, that needs to come out and be communicated very well. I do like the participation from the community. Something that I think works really well is if you give a selection. So maybe if it's something that we could narrow down and have the community participate in it that way.
We come up with a few suggestions.
Correct.
and let them weigh in on it.
Correct. So I think that that would typically might be, it's a little, I know I see the face.
Yes, I will never be a good poker player. The reason that I wanted to interject something there is that the way that your policy is written, you are either suggesting something to the manager to follow through with a process, or, and the manager can determine what process is necessary. If it's something huge, we'll do a bigger process. If it's something small, we would do a smaller process. D is suggesting that you would solicit suggestions. You wouldn't propose them to the citizens.
But
Now,
couldn't the process be a survey? Couldn't the process
could-
be
Absolutely.
a
there's-
poll?
Yes, there are lots and lots of
So-
ways to do that, but I would definitely provide that other space in your survey.
As other,
Yeah.
just on there?
Other, or maybe have a box for them to fill in order to comply with, if you're going under
Mhm.
D, you're asking them to tell you, as opposed to you saying, here's what we're looking at.
That's leadership. Having somebody else do what you want, making them think it's their idea. I mean, it's give good, if you give them good enough suggestions, you're going to have people agreeing with you. You know, they aren't all gonna want to name it after their great uncle Elmer, who lived there for 40 years just down the street, and so it should be named after him, or some weird thing. But if you give them some solid suggestions,
Branstetter?
Yeah, not sure that I see the urgency to do anything
Mhm.
other than the biggest culprit of calling it different things at different times is the city. I mean, we are the ones that do that, and I think we should perhaps give some guidance to the city manager to, let's, for now, officially call it Motor Avenue. Okay, and you know, and if the city begins to consistently doing that, and we are able to speak intelligently about why is it Motor Avenue, you know, and then we can see whether over the next year that just causes people's eyes to glare over and they're trying to wonder what that is or whether we do something. But I think that's the first order of business of let's get our own act in order, start calling it Motor Avenue. And then if we want to solicit names, say, this is Motor Avenue, tell people why Motor Avenue is significant, but say we're soliciting other ideas and we're going to work through this process and all the ideas that come in, or then you fed into the hopper through a process as defined by the city manager according to our resolution, and we'll get somewhere eventually.
You're getting some
But
no's.
maybe we'll have to wait for the trolley, but
Ms. Bell.
You're giving a name and you're continuing with the confusion of the branding if you do that. And then you come back and you say, now we want you to vote. So I am very much against just giving it a name right now. If we need community input, which I think we do, we give the suggestions and put in the other, but we shouldn't come across and just call it Motor Avenue just because as a name place, a placeholder right now. The branding is already very confusing for people. Nobody knows what to call it. I think this is a great time because nothing is going to be down there until summer again. So, I mean, besides Christmas that's where it starts. So I think it could be some good time to look at the naming in between in the spring area, but I am not behind calling it something just as a placeholder right now.
And we could even put a teaser out in the Connections magazine coming soon, opportunity to rename Motor Avenue or the plaza. Ms. Farmer.
I would be interested in having this city manager, as per the memo, suggest a process for us. I wholeheartedly agree with Councilmember Bell that just calling it Motor Avenue and seeing how it goes is not definitive and does not get us anywhere. I'm really interested in us taking a stand or reaching out to citizens one way or the other, settle the matter. Because it's our city, we need to be able to know how to refer to it, and yes. So a process to settle the matter, I think is appropriate. And I do see the urgency because this is a community gathering place. We have commissioned a very interesting and big piece of art that is going to be going in there at some point. There's going to be uplighting of the Gary oak trees, which everybody is very interested in. There are all sorts of interesting things going on in this space. We are trying to invite economic development to come in and grow that area. This is a very important area to the city.
Right, I
And,
agree. Yeah.
and we need to be in agreement and settled and excited about what we do. And if that is based on the history, the significant history of the area, wonderful. I cannot argue with that, but we need to be behind it, solidly behind it.
So I don't hear a downside to looking at paragraph D or hunting to the manager to come up with a process, which could be paragraph D. Where the city manager's process is there. C is where the proposed name and information submitted to the city or referred by the city council will be reviewed by the manager, who then directs the process. I don't know if we've had that yet, so maybe we're really looking at D.
Or maybe it's, as the memo describes, we provide discretion to the city manager to tailor the process.
He's gonna hate that.
Is
But-
he really?
He's going to delegate, he's going to
Right.
delegate that appropriately.
Right. Let's just do D. He's not gonna like C, I can tell you. Don't you think, Mr. City Manager? I think
It
we
doesn't
can-
matter what I like or don't like, okay? So.
We can open
uh,
up to that survey, though.
so,
think, yeah.
well, since you don't have a name right now, what I hear the council saying is you'd like us to come back to you with a process and the mechanics.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And then that would generate a name or some names and.
well, I think we've
the
heard
like.
3 names. I don't think we don't have any names. I heard
Yes.
Unity Plaza is one.
Yes.
We've heard Theater Square and, and we've heard Motor Avenue Plaza or Motor Avenue.
Yes.
So we've heard those things.
I think you can trust that the city manager will reach out within the organization to people who are most in touch with this issue, not the least of which is your parks director, who's very aware of any and all of those
Right.
issues, your communications director, who is very good at, number one, knowing what we may or may not have been communicating and what we can or will communicate going forward, among others. So you will hear back from us on that.
Thank you.
We'll just say that once we allow the residents to have some input, it goes over much easier.
Very good. Well, that's it for your hot seat appearance on 2 items. Thank you very much. So items tentatively scheduled for the next regular meeting on November 7 include the listing that's before you. It's quite a few things we have going on, including the final amendment, quote unquote, final of the critical areas ordinance and the tree preservation code. So be looking for that in your packet. So now we'll turn to reports by the city manager.
Good evening, Mayor and Deputy Mayor, council members. Just a few updates. Somewhere on the dais here is a plaque that we received from the American Planning Association recognizing
students from the University of Washington School of Evans Public Policy for the work that they did on the climate change perception study. That's, as Mr. Bureau would say, that's a big deal. And so we wanted to share that with you. We're hoping to maybe, there's an outside chance, maybe we could get the students to come back as part of a Zoom meeting and do a presentation to them officially. However, we have heard back from the UW that they've all graduated and they've all moved on and got jobs and the like. But in any event, we just wanted to share this with you. They also sent individual certificates that we have passed on to UW to pass on to the graduate students as well. But we just wanted to share that with you because, again, I think that's a big deal. Very positive reflection on particularly the students and the Community and Economic Development Department as well.
Did you have a comment, Ms. Farmer?
Through the power of technology, if we've sent them a certificate, we can ask them to post a selfie and then we can do some sort of collaboration photographically. So that would be fun.
Also, on the dais, we've laid out a draft letter that would recommend sending to the Pierce County Council as it relates to Pierce County's what was previously known as Community First Village. We understand now they're calling the Pierce County Village proposal, which is out at the end of Spanaway Loop Road. And you've actually already gone on record with a letter supporting this. And just given where we are in the process, particularly since this body has received a number of requests to, send your support either individually or collectively to either the Pierce County Council and or the Tacoma Rescue Mission, which we understand is actually going to be taking on this project. We thought it would be beneficial to send a letter, and I had a conversation with Councilmember Anderson as well about this. And so that's before you. I know the mayor and we spoke this morning, and one of the suggestions perhaps, and if council is inclined to do this, we can add this, would be to include some language in here that, given the environmental sensitivity of that area, that the proposed development be connected to sewers or some kind of internal sewer function as opposed to a septic system. Maybe that's not how the project is going to end up, but I think that would be beneficial to go on record as well.
We could certainly state our preference that they connect to sewer.
I'm curious what the rationale is for sending a second letter if we've already sent one letter.
Oh, good question, Councilmember. So the first letter was just kind of a general letter as the county council was appropriating the ARPA funds, and they did provide monies for this program. So now they're at the next step, which is actually, my understanding is selecting the Tacoma Rescue Mission. They have an actual site. And so this would actually be, this letter is actually in support of where they plan on actually building the proposal and in the development. So it's much more specific.
So has this body considered anything about the site? Is there, I'm understanding that there is some environmental sensitivity about the site, and so.
And that's correct, Councilmember. That's why.
This is the kind of the
No,
first
that's
I'm
why,
hearing about
that's why,
it, so.
yeah, no, that's why since we drafted this letter, we've learned a little bit more regarding the sensitivity of the site. And actually this weekend, I actually pulled it up online and there's a big lake in the middle of the property. So the recommendation would be to include language in here that if the county council does move forward with this, that it not be a septic system, that they be connected to sewers or some type of sewer related infrastructure to deal with the effluent.
If it's that environmentally sensitive, it's probably going to trigger SEPA. So there's probably going to be all sorts of regulatory considerations. So maybe we don't have to be so specific to specify sewers over septic, but something more along the lines of take the highest environmental sensitivities into account or some such thing. Sorry, Mr. Anderson.
Certainly appropriate infrastructure, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I think appropriate infrastructure would be a good phrase. There is great environmental sensitivity, but there's also 27 buildable acres out of a 90-acre site. I mean, that's basically what the ratio is. There's barely a third or close to a third that's actually usable property. So you have to work around the environmental sensitivity. So and this could be done on a 20-acre site. So that's kind of where they are. It has to be the right 20 acres. So.
Mr. Branstetter?
Well, I certainly think we need to address the environmental elements of, and not just this site, but particularly with respect to sewers. There may be a word to word it for this site, but include something about that particularly the Pierce County sewer utility. That the council should look at some policies that will mitigate, will ensure that sewer services are provided at facilities that are designed to help the homeless or low-income housing, and look at a cost structure that mitigates the cost while making sure that the health and safety benefits of sanitary sewers are provided in such locations.
You think you got the tenor? Got it. We can take another review, but sewers would be critical, I think, out there, and it's an incentive for them to actually extend the sewer system in places where it needs to be.
And they're going to be putting in other utilities, so.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and then there was a comment in somebody's letter that came in the email. I mean, there is an issue of all that effluent in a watershed area that could further impact the lakes, including Stillicum Lake, if not Spanaway Lake. So, a challenge.
The main problem currently with Spanaway Lake is that all the waterfront property, with the exception, I think, of a trailer park, are on septic and bleed into the lake. So this isn't the problems for Spanaway Lake. Spanaway Lake's got a different problem. They don't have sewers.
So this would be a chance for the county to get a 2-for-1 special.
Would, given our recent focus on tree preservation and that sort of theme, would we want to throw something in there about hoping that this area stays as preserved as possible? Obviously, we don't have control over what happens, but
that would be ordinarily part of the SEPA process and critical areas stuff involved with the 50 some odd acres of wetlands and a 90-acre parcel, I would assume, right?
so are sewers. And we're looking to add something about sewers.
Yeah, but
I guess I'm trying to figure out why, what purpose? And so what are the things that absolutely have to be in here in order for us to get our point across?
well, hopefully we have consensus on what our point is. I think the point is we recognize and support a project that houses the chronically homeless, including provides shelter for those that we just talked about having a need to find locations for them to be housed off of the streets of Lakewood appropriately. So that would be one thing to say in this letter. Number two, I think we're saying that kudos to finding an operator in the form of the rescue mission. And three, that we are hopeful that we certainly would support this project and hope, or we could say, provided that appropriate infrastructure is provided to the site, including but not limited to sewers and appropriate treatment of environmental sensitivities, whatever the language should be, something like that. And that could be pretty broad. Mr. Brokey.
I think the mayor's words are well put. I think sewer is important because I think this is a good test case for the sewer utility to go forward with construction in a manner that's different than what their policy has been forever, which is if you pay us now, we'll build it, which is okay, you know, pay me and I'll build you a building, Jason. I mean, it's going to be very difficult in the urban areas, in the UGA, that's the Seward area, or in the sewer, Pierce County Sewer Utilities operating area, to build out affordable housing of any sort, even middle market housing. If every time someone wants to build, it's like, great, yeah, extend the sewer 300 feet, take a right. Oh, you'll need this, you'll need that. And it's, you know, $500,000. I mean,
Right.
Us as an example, one of the reasons that Habitat's able to build in Tillicum, this new project, is because we're putting in something like over $200,000 in ARPA money, correct?
Right.
To build out the infrastructure. The expectation of the public is going to be that there's sewer, that there's curb gutter, sidewalk, and various things like that. And maybe not for Community First Village, but I'm saying about most projects, right? That the public is going to say, well, they should have to do the same things that a guy who wanted to build a high-end apartment complex should have to build. So I think our sewer utility really is going to have to think through this about if we're going to build out affordable housing, people need to be able to pay for it over time. It means our sewer bill's higher. But it means that this stuff can be built. There's got to be
Yeah,
a
it's gotta
balance.
get
And so
done.
I think mentioning sewer, saying, let's get this done. Let's get it done the right way. Let's figure out a new way for you guys to help us build affordable housing. That's what's going to impact us here in Lakewood if we can get that kind of assistance.
Well, yeah, no time like the present. Mr. Anderson.
Well, to dovetail that with our suggestion that we we were talking in our legislative priorities about some relief in that regard. I'm not sure exactly which the line between the sewer watersheds or whatever they call them is right about where this property is. I don't know which side it's on, but one of those is the most expensive in the county. And it's out in the Spanaway area. There's one it costs you $7,500 to hook up and another $7,500 for a future capacity charge. So it costs $15,000 per residential equivalent unit. The quick calculation on this project is that it's just over 70 residential equivalent units. It'll be 200 and some. If fully built out, it would be 200 and some, but you don't count toilets and sinks and bedrooms. So it's less. That's like over towards $600,000 just in fees. Irrespective of the cost of actually putting lines and pumps and those kind of things in. So to Mr. Bulkey's point, they have to look at it a different way. They may be told to look at it a different way. That's up to the council ultimately, but the council can tell them, don't charge that, make it affordable.
Right. And this way it gets the sewers out to your new airport sooner than later. Mr. Branstetter.
No, and to be honest, we can be a good example that when it was identified in the earlier years of cityhood, that Tillicum had been skipped in the installation of sewers with the large LED. You know, we went forward and without hardly any complaint at all, we put a surcharge, and it was supported broadly in the community of a surcharge on all the people that already had sewers to raise the money to deal with the loans that were necessary to build out a sewer system so that the folks in Tillicum, a low-income neighborhood would have the benefit of sanitary sewers being able to go and do that as well as benefits to that. And I heard very, very little complaint about having to pay that surcharge for that purpose. And, if the county were to look at doing that and say it's to be able to provide sewer services to where we're planning to help homeless. And then if they would say they would be able to pay for this project over time, do it in bonded, I guess, with a revenue source.
Well, I think we've given you plenty of feedback there. The revisions, if you need some wordsmithing, let us know. Let me know. I'd be happy to help you.
Roger that. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yes, sir. Just a few more updates. Some library updates. You might have seen last Tuesday that the Pierce County Library System, they announced that they've secured a lease to locate an interim library here in downtown Lakewood at the corner of Gravely Lake Drive and Alpharetta Drive. And the site is a little bit over an acre. It was previously owned by the Chevron Corporation. And earlier this month, it was actually acquired by a property management company that's identified themselves as an LLC out of Bothell. They being the library system, they're looking to install an interim library with a footprint of about 7,000 to 10,000 square feet. And don't have a idea on the timeline or when they plan on coming in for a pre-app or anything, but we've been told sometime soon in the very near future. So we'll keep you appraised of that. One of the messages that we have had for the library district since they started looking in the downtown area for a location was that they are going to have to comply with the city sub-area plan as it relates to our design standards, no matter what type of facility they build. So we've been crystal clear with them from day one on those standards. So just wanted to also let you know that, since that's a considerable policy objective of this council, that we adhere to our design standards. The city is helping introduce them to Kite Realty, one of the key property owners in the downtown. They've asked the city to help facilitate an introduction. And so we plan, I think it's actually scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, with some of their leadership out of Indianapolis. And the library does potentially have an opportunity as it looks at future libraries of, depending upon the outcome of the Library Advisory Committee, of perhaps locating somewhere in the downtown. And Kite Realty in the past has expressed an interest either as an interim library or as a permanent solution. So again, the purpose of the city is simply to facilitate an introduction and introduce them to Kite Realty. We're also working on the fiscal analysis that this body had asked that compares the cost of library services as it relates to the property taxes that are levied by the library here in Lakewood. We've actually developed a pretty succinct model in terms of just comparing cost to revenues and based on their financials. And so we're going to be meeting with them on October 31st to see if they can, quote unquote, help us fill in the blanks as it relates to that. And we'd like to report that back to you, as I promised, sometime in November. And then the Library Advisory Committee, they are having their last meeting on this Wednesday, actually, October 26th. The proposed goal of that meeting is for them to identify recommendations for future libraries. It relates to the main library and the Tillicum Library, whether that's renovate the existing facilities, tear down and build new, or locate someplace else. And so they'll be finalizing that. And then they will be presenting that to a joint meeting of this body and the Pierce County Library Systems Board of Trustees, which is scheduled in this chambers on November 17th at 6 p.m. And I think I'd mentioned last week, want to try and identify a date and time for this body to meet with your county council member, Jenny Hitchen. And I'd ask you to look at your schedules on in early part of December, actually early to mid-December, December 1, December 8th, December 13th, or December 14th. And if you could let me know if those dates work for you, or if you'd like, we could send out a little poll as well, if that would be beneficial. Okay, we'll do that. We'll send you out a poll. Also this week, we're going to be meeting with LASA regarding the city's initiative to both sponsor a state capital budget request for them, as well as really the purpose of the meeting is to talk about the city's idea to sponsor a federal earmark request of $2.5 million for their new housing development that they're proposing as part of their phase 3 down on Gravity Lake Drive. Also, we have heard back from DSHS and as it relates to historic Port Steilacoom, and we're hoping to be able to meet with their representatives sometime before Thanksgiving. So sometime in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So we'll keep you updated on that. And then I know some of you have been wondering about the gateway sign at Bridgeport and Pacific Highway South. So that's actually going to get under construction here in the next week or two. We're going to be actually doing it internally with our own crew, very similar to the approach that we took with the rockery, if you will, that was built at 112th and Gravity Lake Drive. The goal is to not just put in, the sign, put the sign back in, but also to put protective measures, particularly from the rear and a little bit from the front, but also having some, nice design standards. So both our Parks and Recreation Department and our Public Works Engineering Department have been working collaboratively. So one on the engineering side, one on the aesthetic looking side. So look for that to come together here in the near future. Given the number of vehicles that actually destroyed that sign, it'll all be funded with insurance proceeds from.
Yeah, get some big rocks.
I can't, yeah. Also, the non-motorized plan, the survey. So far, the city has received 175 responses. That was actually as of midweek last week. And so the Public Works Engineering Department has extended it to keep it open until the end of this week, October 28th. And then, they've done a good job in sending it out to a wide range of groups and individuals and things like that. And so we'll keep doing that. And then we hope to be able to have some preliminary findings that we can hopefully share with you sometime in November. Also, Mary Dosworth, our Parks and Rec Director, she asked me just to give you a heads up that PRAB later this week, I don't know if it's tomorrow, if it's Wednesday, at their monthly meeting for October, they're going to be meeting with the neighbors over by Primley Park to just get their feedback and input on some of the improvements that have been occurring over there. And so just wanted to give you a courtesy. That's Primley Park, which is over.
Off at the Coven?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Brookline, thank you. Yep.
Brooklyn, okay, great. Yeah, that's nice.
And then just in terms of upcoming events and your schedule, I mentioned the joint meeting with the Board of Trustees from the Pierce County Library System. But this Thursday, the mayor will be hosting the monthly or bi-monthly community coffee house where our Public Works Engineering Director, Paul Bucius, will be talking about all that is transportation. And then also October 29th, this Saturday, the Korean Women's Association is having their 50th Jubilee. We sent you a link if the council has an interest in attending. And then November 5th and the 6th, we have our fall community cleanup in partnership with Waste Connections. And that's from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. We are looking for some volunteers. We are full on Sunday. So if you'd like to come out, Saturday is right now, we do have some openings. So if you'd like to do and just come out and just kind of chit chat with folks and help out, you're more than welcome. Just let us know and we can get you slotted and get you a vest. So with that, Mayor, that's my report.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. Coffey, was that, since that was a service station lot across the street, is that on our list of contaminated soil?
Deputy Mayor, it was, and Department of Ecology has cleared it.
Very good, thank you.
So actually that goes to our Economic Development Manager, Becky Newton.
Very good. Well, thank you. Now we'll turn quickly to council comments. How about Mr. Boki?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one comment. This Steilacoom Drive project, Steilacoom Boulevard project, is about halfway, 2/3 complete. The other half, I guess, the hard half where they're gonna have to build the wall is gonna take a while more, but the portion that's done between Custer and the 88th Street portion there looks really nice and is I think about 90% done. And I drove on it today and very well done. And I think it looks really good and really adds to that. And I think also helps traffic safety a bit too. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the project, but really does look nice. So kudos to Public Works and to the contractor.
Mr. Branstetter.
That I am planning to attend the KWA 50th anniversary dinner this coming Saturday to be able to go and do that. I was thinking about coming to the community coffee house, but I was unsure what the topic is this time.
Construction projects, part 2.
Okay, and I will probably make that to be able to do that. That's all I really have.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Bell. Councilmember Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had coffee this morning with the library system director. It was a good opportunity to start to get to know her and to learn more about her background and what she's excited about in her new job. And so you all are on her, in her sights to have a coffee meeting as well. So look out for that invitation. The Sex Offender Policy Board has a subcommittee that is formed around the implementation, the practical implementation of 5163. And that committee meeting, even though most of our duties, we were activated earlier this year to do a certain set of duties, and that will culminate in a report to the legislature in December of this year. But the implementation committee will continue serving through June of 23. And they have an amazing lineup of folks who convene to talk around the practicalities of how this law works or doesn't work. And we have the opportunity as a city to participate also through my participation on behalf of AWC. And so there's some really interesting opportunities there that I've been chatting with the city manager about, and I will be getting him some more information and some more to come. And on Saturday, I will be attending the Chinese Reconciliation Walk and event in downtown Tacoma. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
Well, I won't be here next week, but it won't be because I'm not doing something productive for the city. Let's see, tomorrow I'm going to the Parks Board meeting. Thursday, I have the wonderful opportunity for another Puget Sound Regional Council meeting. And Sunday through Wednesday, I'm going to be at the Association of Defense Communities Installation Innovation Forum in Phoenix with my ADC board hat on. And the good news about that is it's a threefer. I can represent the city, the county, and SSMCP, and county agreed to pay for it. So.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the pleasure Saturday to attend the Filipino American History Month. It was done by the students at Clover Park High School. Well done. It was interesting to watch the youth control and take leadership of the program. So I really appreciated that. One of the questions that I got from some of the leaders there was that if Lakewood, and I asked my colleagues, if Lakewood would present them a proclamation honoring October as the Filipino American History Month in 2023. So we had to go for, thank you guys.
Yeah, we should do that
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I will be attending the Korean Women Association on the 29th.
Well, great. Thank you very much. It's been a busy week. On Wednesday, I followed up on an invitation to take a tour of the Port of Tacoma. Met with the executive director. We talked about a lot of projects in process. And Mr. Caulfield, one of the interesting points that Eric Johnson raised, which has not really been on the radar for a legislative agenda item at the federal or maybe state level, is his opinion that the infrastructure, I think it's T7, for the pier that is used by JBLM to deploy is or will be in significant need of renovation, repair, or rebuilding. And that's something that really hasn't come to the radar, but it could be an issue that we might support as a matter of maybe our federal legislative priority at some point. It certainly could be an issue of national security importance to make sure that that thing can actually sustain. It's T7, I think, over there. It's the one that the military uses, but it's like old rickety, I shouldn't say rickety, piers. Yeah, one of them over there, but he raised the issue that it's something that the region and the community needs to recognize as something that's going to need some attention sooner than later. So I said I'd bring it up and let everyone know. But it was a good tour. And I told him that you guys might be in touch on that, see how we might be of help, because he doesn't even know or believe that JBLM knows that it's of concern yet, but it's something to be elevated. Yeah, we don't want it to deteriorate. Thursday, I attended the Pierce County Regional Council meeting that evening, and there were no action items. It was mostly some reports back and forth. But more to follow on that. There was a recognition of Russ Blunt and his contributions to PCRC over the many, many years that he was involved, and it was a good evening for that. On Friday, I attended Rotary here in Lakewood. There was a great presentation by the one of our commissioners, Clint Johnson, as well as the county gentleman who deals with the 1/10 of 1% funding for mental health and behavioral health. It was very, very interesting to see the proposed outlay of significant resources for mental health services in the county. And as we recognize and remember, we punted appropriately to the county to pass the 1/10 of 1% for behavioral health funding, because we understood that it would be a better regional approach for those programs. And so I hope that say in a year, we can have a study session and invite Richard back. And he would be happy to come back and give a presentation to our council about the impact of the funding, the positive impact of the funding over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. So that would be a good thing for us to hear. On Saturday, I was also present with the deputy mayor for the Filipino American History Month Youth and Community Summit. It was fairly well attended. So there were two of us from the council there, and I might point out, I didn't see any members of the Clover Park School District Board there, but it was good for us to be there. So they appreciated that. That evening, I then put on a different suit and tie and went to the Pierce County or Pierce College Gala event put on by the foundation, effectively commemorating 50 years or 55 years of great work in the community on behalf of so many students who've attended community college there, and certainly in significant recognition of the massive contributions made by Dr. Michelle Johnson over the course of her many, many years, 25 years, I think, of the 55 or more, 45, that's right, of the 55. So many numbers that were being passed along, including the raise the paddle numbers, which were extraordinary. I think they were attempting to raise, I don't know, 600,000 for a foundation scholarship for students in need. And I think they almost hit 800,000 or 900,000. Yeah, it's just fantastic. The level of commitment in the community to students who come to Lakewood to go to Pierce College, and certainly Pierce College Puyallup at the Puyallup campus, but certainly the Fort Slocum campus. And it was just a really, really well done evening with lots of elected officials present and certainly lots of community members from all over, and Lakewood looked good that night. I mean, the level of support for students and Pierce College and recognition of Michelle Johnson.
Where was
It was held at Pierce College. It was in their gymnasium facility, which is now named the Dr. Michelle L. Johnson Gymnasium.
so now that you brought it up, has the city, have we as a city council plan to have some
recognition for Dr.
For
Johnson.
her, yeah.
We should. She doesn't retire officially until the end of the calendar year. And so we should come up with something to recognize her.
We should.
Yeah, do we have consensus to do that? I think that would be a great thing to recognize her many
Need to find out
contributions.
when she-
She's an amazing person and has done amazing work. We've got. Yeah, a nice little plaque or proclamation or something we can frame. It looks good. Yeah, with the challenge plate. We could do that. We could give her a key to Motor Triangle Theater Plaza. No, but I agree. We should do something appropriate. Yeah, the font of knowledge. I like it. Anyway, a great event. And the last thing, I had the chance to receive from one of our fire district commissioners, kind of a memorandum that they're discussing the challenge that they face continuing to service the city or the town of DuPont on their mutual aid agreement. Because DuPont apparently doesn't pay West Pierce any consideration, and they don't have any property tax monies flowing to West Pierce, but provide a lot more calls for service than initially anticipated, and it could become a public safety challenge. So those of us in Lakewood and University Place are now subsidizing the services that are provided to DuPont. So more to follow on that. I just let you be aware of the concerns that are out there. I make no editorial comment on it.
That's longstanding. Stilcom was doing the same thing, and eventually West Pierce talked him into contracting with the district. DuPont has always had artificially low taxes because of the association, and they voted against staffing at the West Pierce level, so West Pierce withdrew. And it's kind of a surprise that it's all coming back on a mutual aid basis because they're perennially understaffed in DuPont.
Well, and it's becoming a little bit challenging, shall we say. So from what I hear. That's all I have. Any other questions for the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.